My name is Claudia Diaz-Combs, and I am a dual degree master's student in Latin American Studies and Public Health, and my concentration for Public Health is Environmental Health. So my research is all based in Ecuador, looking at the relationship between oil drilling, politics, and indigenous resistance movements, with particular focus on this case in Ecuador with Chevron. So I'll just give you a little recap of the case, so I know you just watched the documentary, Crude. So from 1964 to 1992, Texaco was drilling in the Oriente region, which is an oil-rich field about the size of Rhode Island in Ecuador. So Texaco was drilling there for a long time, and they used substandard operations when they were doing their drilling, which included outdated technology and equipment. They left extensive contamination of water and soil. They would dig huge unlined pits, and that would seep into the groundwater system, and many people that lived in this area, including a lot of indigenous tribes like Secoya, Siona, Guarani, Cofan, as well as non-indigenous rural farmers, would drink this water supply, and they became sick and actually died from it. So a large part of this drilling happened in a place called Lago Agrio, which is in the province of Sucumbíos, which is where the documentary focuses mainly in this part of Ecuador. So as we know, Ecuador is an oil-rich country that produces about 21 billion gallons of crude oil a day, and about 1/3 of that is actually exported to the United States. So it's a really important commodity for the country economically, but it also has this downside, as you all saw in the documentary. So Texaco never prepared a single environmental impact study, which actually after 1976 was required by law in Ecuador. So they were they failed to monitor oil pipelines in the region, which led to spills, leaks that would go undetected for years. So Texaco had a careless attitude towards preventing and cleaning up all of these all of these spills and things that devastated the ecosystem, as well as the health of the people that lived in that area. So in 1993, 30,000 indigenous and rural Ecuadorians filed a class action suit against Texaco, calling for extensive environmental contamination to their ancestral lands. So this case has been litigated since then, and in 2001, Chevron and Texaco actually merged, and Chevron took on all of Texaco's ongoing lawsuits. So during the trial, there were environmental assessments that were done that showed extensive toxic contamination to the lands. They showed very high levels of carcinogens that were well above permissible level for humans. Chevron also claims that they remediated many of these sites that people lived in, but that actually turned out to be untrue. There were over 64,000 samples that were taken in the area, and the case itself is extremely extensive. It's about 250,000 pages long, and these tests were done from both the Chevron environmental team as well as the plaintiffs. And they found the same results. So there's no denying there was contamination done that was not cleaned up. So the film, I believe, ended in 2009, and since then there's been a lot that has developed, and the case continues to this day. So I'll give you all an update of what has happened since then, because I interviewed the plaintiff team. So I think in the video it highlights Mr. Steven Donziger, who's the attorney from the United States, and Mr. Pablo Fajardo, who is the attorney from Ecuador. So they were both people that I interviewed for my research extensively. So the information that I'm presenting to you guys today is from my talk with them, as well as the legal documents that I read, because I read extensively on this case as well, including the actual trial, which has a lot of information. So in 2011, the highest court in Sucumbíos, where Lago Agrio is, ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, which means they ruled against Chevron, and they fined Chevron $19 billion, which was a sum that was later reduced to $9 billion. So they called for cleanup of the lands. There was the trial is broken down to many different price. They break it down for what costs will go towards different things. So that includes environmental cleanup, damages to indigenous culture, health, things like that. So Chevron has actually gone on record saying that they will never pay this fee that they were fined. They promised a lifetime of litigation. And they have even actually done interviews with newspapers, magazines like Newsweek, saying things like, we can't let these small countries take advantage of corporations like us that invest all over the world. So Chevron is one of the most powerful and richest multinational corporations in the world, so they have endless resources to actually do things like extend this case and never pay. So it's not empty words, which is quite scary. So during the trial, Chevron would actually partake in actions in order to delay or corrupt the proceedings in the Ecuadorian court. So they went to great lengths to sabotage the sites that were going to be inspected by the so the courts will send out neutral environmental scientists to test the sites to see if there is contamination. So what Chevron would do is they would know when this inspection was going to happen, so they would actually send their own team out beforehand, and they would pick kind of like safe zones where there was less contamination, and then they would dictate that to the court and tell them to go here as opposed to another area, because they knew that that would demonstrate that they would show the true extent of what the contamination was. So aside from that, Chevron would also submit false documents to the court. The day when in one particular example, there was going to be an inspection in a particular area that was heavily contaminated. So the day before the inspection, Chevron actually brought a supposed military report that claimed that the court experts, or whatever you want to call them, the environmental experts, should not go to this area because there was a supposed military guerrilla coup that was going to happen, and so it was a really unsafe place to be. So of course the court did not go out there, the judge didn't go. So they contacted the military and asked them about this. They asked what was happening there, if it was still safe, and it turns out this was completely falsified by Chevron. There was never any attempt at a military coup in this particular region. So no report was ever filed, so they just wanted to make sure that there was not, light was, they wanted to make sure that they didn't see how much contamination was done in this particular region. So aside from all that, Chevron would actually also file motion after motion in a rapid-fire succession in order to slow down the court process. So there was one time that Chevron actually filed 39 different motions in less than an hour, and these are really extensive, complicated legal documents that take a lot of time to process and to read. And the Ecuadorian judicial system is quite unique because there's a statutory requirement that says that any judge who is on any particular case has to act on a motion within 3 days of it being filed. So Chevron used this towards their advantage. If a judge does not act within that motion within 3 days, they can be suspended, and if it goes longer than a week, they can actually be removed from the trial. So Chevron was able to successfully remove several judges due to this document dump strategy, which of course works in favor of them and against the plaintiffs because they'll have to convince a new person about this case that they've been working on for so many years. So Chevron also falsely accused the plaintiffs of bribing the judge. They said that the plaintiffs actually helped him ghostwrite, or they ghostwrote the testimony from 2011. And these claims were based on two expert witnesses that Chevron had. So one was a supposed environmental expert, and the other was a previous Ecuadorian judge who said he was actually there when this supposed ghostwriting and bribery happened. So the thing is that these expert witnesses were paid incredibly well by Chevron for their testimonies. So they both received monthly stipends of $10,000, they received sports cars, they received various electronic equipment like computers, cell phones, things like that. One of them was actually given a fully furnished home with a swimming pool. They had their own security team. So Chevron has actually acknowledged these payments and has claimed that they are reasonable security needs. So you can take that as you may. I don't really see how a swimming pool is a security need, but these, like I said, these plaintiffs, or these attorneys for Chevron have ways of convincing for whatever. So anyway, after all of this supposed evidence came out, Chevron filed a lawsuit in a New York City court. So I don't know if you remember from the video, but they were trying to remove the trial from Ecuador to the United States because of supposed bias. So they filed a motion in New York City with a Judge Kaplan. claiming bribery, false documents, ghostwriting of testimonies. So the court actually ruled in favor of Chevron, and the case was overturned, which meant that they were not going to have to pay the $9 billion. And Judge Kaplan from New York claimed that the previous judgment was obtained by corrupt means. This is 2013, and then in 2015, we see one of the expert witnesses, the one who was a former Ecuadorian judge claiming that he was there at the time of this bribery happening and this ghostwriting, comes forward and admits that he lied on stand. Everything he said was untrue, and he sheds light on the extent of his payments from Chevron. So just to kind of back up a little bit, before the ruling in 2011, Chevron actually sold off all of its assets in Ecuador, which is basically the oil reserves or blocks that they had. They sold them off because they didn't want to, they wanted to avoid responsibility and ownership for Texaco's actions. The people who filed the plaintiff team who filed the judgment in 2011 actually also filed motions in Canada, Brazil, and Argentina, which are all places that Chevron is very heavily invested. In Canada alone, Chevron, I believe, has over $15 billion worth of oil assets. So they were going to file motions in these places in order to seize what they deserved from Ecuador, since they were no longer there. So after this news about the expert witness came forth that he lied, they filed a motion in Canada, in a Canada Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court in Canada ruled unanimously in favor of the plaintiffs, saying that the Ecuadorian citizens have the right to seize Chevron's assets to comply with what happened in Ecuador. So there is currently a hearing happening now in Toronto. It started in September, and it will inevitably be slowed down, extended, and Chevron will put forth barriers in order for the case to continue on, as they will always do. So there was a term that was used in the video, which I really actually liked because I think it speaks quite truly to this case, and it's that this is really a David versus Goliath type of story. But in my opinion, it's not really centered around these attorneys that took down Chevron, because I don't think that the story is about them. I think it's about the people who organized, came together, saw what was happening in their land, to their people, and they held this multinational corporation accountable, which is something that's quite rare in South America, especially where a lot of resource exploitation happens. I mean, this case is tremendously sad because people have died due to Chevron's negligence, but there is an element of hope, in my opinion, because these people were able to, like I said, organize and file this motion and show the world that this was happening, because before then it was not as common, it was not known that this was something that was taking place. So Chevron thought they could get away with basically the biggest environmental oil disaster in history, as well as these deaths from that. But they were not able to get away with it without any kind of guilt or blame or things like that. The Ecuadorians demonstrated that they had to be held accountable, which I find very fascinating. So my research is basically exploring the stakeholders' interpretations of the case. So that includes the attorneys, that includes rural farmers, indigenous people, expert witnesses. I wanted to find out their reactions to the case. I wanted to better understand the efforts and strategies that they partook in to win this case. I wanted to understand perspectives and emotions during all of this entire process. I believe that through all of this information, I can actually possibly create some kind of framework of community resilience that can be applied to other countries, other groups that are experiencing this same kind of depletion or exploitation by multinational corporations. So this past summer, I was awarded the Tinker Field research grant, and I was in Quito and in Lago Agrio, that you guys saw from the video, interviewing these people about the case. So I was able to interview a lot of members of the Cofan tribe, which is where Pablo Fajardo is part of that group. He was one of the Ecuadorian attorney. So this summer, that's what I was doing, interviewing people, and I was also out observing different sites. I was asking people what the land meant to them, what it meant for Texaco to be there drilling, because I know that that is a different question for various subgroups that I interviewed. So I was able to create this very rich oral history of what the Amazon means to indigenous people, what it means to non-indigenous rural farmers. It turns out, well, of course this is something that we all probably guessed, but their health and their family's health is incredibly important to them, and cancer rates were very common in this area, more common basically probably compared to the rest of the country. So I was able to find out why it was so important for them to mobilize, to organize against Chevron. So I'm hoping that I can return next summer. I want to combine this research with my public health research. I want to actually take water samples from different sites. When I was there, I was able to meet a lot of people who live in the area, and they actually told me that I could come back and take water samples from their drinking water source. Like I mentioned before, Chevron has claimed to have remediated a lot of these areas so that they're no longer contaminated with with oil. When I was there, I saw some of these supposed remediated sites, and that's not the case. Basically, their interpretation of cleaning up, of remediating, is putting a layer of soil on top of this already contaminated oil, dirt, or whatever you want to call it. So I want to see if there are still trace metal contaminants in the drinking water for the people. So that's what I hope to do next summer. I also want to distribute a questionnaire for the inhabitants that live there. I want to see how they view their environment and what kinds of risks they think that they are facing on a day-to-day basis. So I find these topics really important to research because this is not, like I mentioned before, this is not unique to Ecuador. So indigenous communities and the environment are frequently exploited for resources like oil, water, minerals, for mining. But as we can see, indigenous people and rural farmers are not complicit to these actions that are taken against them. And I see these protests and these resistant movements sort of as counter-narratives to privilege and power. So, thank you very much.